You've grown your company to over $4 million in ARR now, possibly more. I mean, we're just quoting the information available out there, but you've done it all bootstrapped.
The company does 10 million top line this year, but our newer product, which is really the future of the business, just hit a 6 million run rate last month. Unlike SEO, with GEO, you can get a single mention on a third-party website and have that be the reason that you're showing up as an answer in ChatGPT. We are literally seeing companies get a single earned mention and then show up as the answer a day later.
I never thought of that being possible. A day later, like a brand mention, and a day later an LLM's recommending you.
LinkedIn is the only publication in the world that every one of your customers reads every week. There is no trade publication that every one of your customer reads, but within reason, if you're in B2B or even B2C, most of your customers are probably on LinkedIn.
You famously quote that you have an expertise in getting the first 100 customers. So what's the playbook?
I've been doing go-to-market, kind of different sales and customer development roles for over a decade now. And yeah, that's my favorite part, is figuring out who the first 10 customers are. And then from the first 10 customers.
Hey Noah, welcome to Edbound with Kenner. It's such a pleasure to have you with me. Now, I know you have a stellar background. You've done tremendous work at Stacker, but how do you introduce yourself when you are in a room full of fellow entrepreneurs? I would love to hear it from you.
I'm in a room full of fellow entrepreneurs. I am Noah. I'm CEO and founder at Stacker, and we are a platform for distributing brand editorial as earned media. So essentially turning brands' owned media into earned media across thousands of news outlets.
Wonderful. I mean, it looks like it's well crafted and rehearsed. So you've got that one-liner right in place. But I mean, I would like to highlight for people listening to us that you've grown your company to over $4 million in ARR now, possibly more. I mean, we're just quoting the information available out there, but you've done it all bootstrapped.
We just hit six. We just hit 6 for our recurring revenue product last month. The company does 10 million in top line this year, but our newer product, which is really the future of the business, just hit a 6 million run rate last month.
Whoa, that's tremendous. Congratulations, man. This is so good to hear. And on top of that, I mean, you've bootstrapped it, right? And you've done so many things that so few people are able to get, especially the industry you are in. I mean, the way you're building it. So let's just dive in. I have so many questions. I want to kind of understand and deep dive into how you do it. You famously quote that you have an expertise in getting the first 100 customers. So what's the playbook? And I know you like to kind of talk a lot about what you do on LinkedIn.
Yeah. So I've been doing go-to-market, kind of different sales and customer development roles for over a decade now. And yeah, that's my favorite part, is figuring out who the first 10 customers are. And then kind of from the first 10 customers, figuring out who the first 100 customers should be. I think one of the mistakes people make when they launch a new product is they just assume they know who the buyer should be, why they want it, and what they should charge. And I take a much different approach. When I am launching a new product, I think much more about, the goal is less to bring on the first 10 customers than to figure out who the right customer should be through 100 calls. What that's looked like typically is I'll create a list of 100 people that I think might be good customers. That's maybe 2 or 3 different people at each target organization, because again, I don't know exactly what the right title is, but I'm creating a list of maybe 50 companies and 2 or 3 people at each company, and then just figuring out how the hell I'm going to get on the phone with them. So that could be warm intros. I'm looking on LinkedIn at, these 100 people, who do I have mutual connections with that I can ask for an introduction to? It's cold outreach, and it's just kind of getting scrappy. And I think what's really key in those early days is I'm not necessarily saying, hey, I want to get on the phone with you and pitch you on my product. It's, hey, I want to get on the phone with you because I'm building something in your space. You seem like someone really knowledgeable and then kind of an expert in this space. And I want to pick your brain about which direction we should take the product. I think someone's much more likely to get on the phone with you if you're asking them for advice, and kind of people like to feel smart and important, and that it strokes their ego, and they don't like to be sold. So you're getting on the phone with people basically saying, can I walk you through what I'm building and get your feedback? If they are a good customer, they will say, hey, wait, can I buy this? Or if you built this feature, I would buy this. And if you do 100 calls and basically ask for feedback, you're going to get 10 customers. and you're going to figure out who the right people to talk to are, what pricing you should charge, etc. And then from those first 10 customers, you're going to figure out which of those 3 are great customers, which of them are coming back and saying, I want to spend more. This is the best thing I've ever seen. And you're going to figure out which 3 actually don't really need the product and are not great customers. And from that information, you're going to use that to figure out, how do I get the next 100 customers, which I know you mentioned LinkedIn. That's been a big strategy for us. We can talk more about that, but that's how I think about that first stage of getting your first 10 customers, but also figuring out who those should be.
Wow. Now that sounds elaborate, and it's not like, it's a bit counterintuitive, because a lot of people would just go after the person they like or they feel they're built for without kind of getting into all this deep dive. Now, I have a question which basically leans on what you just spoke about. These 100, are they in multiple ICP buckets, or is that like all lookalikes or a singular ideal customer profile or persona?
Multiple buckets. And I think, that speaks a bit to the getting people with different titles. I think it's better at the start to cast a bit of a wider net. Obviously, you want to kind of iterate very quickly and not waste your time going after the same type of person that's not turning into a buyer. But at the start, much better to cast a wider net. For us, what does that look like, or kind of a practical example? So 3 years ago, we launched this product that essentially we were going to brands that had invested in great editorial content. You think about whether that's Square, that has a newsroom that's producing content on how much people tip across the country, or CarMax, who's hired an editor-in-chief and is putting out content on car buying trends. We wanted to help those brands take that content and get that placed across news outlets across the country. And at first, I didn't know, should I be reaching out to their content team, their editor-in-chief, their managing editor? I didn't know if I should be reaching out to their business development team, to their comms and PR team, to their SEO team. And I said, let's reach out to all of them. And if we reach out to, 3 or 4 different teams at 10 different companies, I don't know who we're going to get on the phone with. Again, you're leaning into, who do I have a mutual connection with? And I think telling people, look, I understand this might be interesting to you. It might be interesting to other people on your team, as opposed to coming in with I just assume that you want this, goes a really long way with buying goodwill from people and getting them to say, hey, actually, this person on my team is really the person you should talk to. And I think as a founder, you need to be willing to kind of pull that thread and be patient and see your job as, I need to go have 100 conversations, and have trust in the process that will get you closer to the right answer.
Wow, this is tremendous. Now, for getting to speak to 100, I believe your top of the funnel is going to be about 1,000. Or would you go really tough after like an ABM approach after these 100?
After these 100 conversations?
No, I'm saying like to get to 100, your top of the funnel, like you'll need a much bigger list to get 100 people on the phone, right? Or the top of the funnel, or your target is 100 and then you end up speaking to maybe 10, 20, 30.
Yeah, I'd say, for your first 20 or 30 calls, you're less thinking about, would this be the perfect customer, than just, is this the profile of the type of company I would want to work with? Candidly, I think your first 30 or 40 conversations should be with companies that are not your, oh my goodness, I hope we end up having them as a customer, because you're not going to be great at the pitch and you only get to talk to them once. So I think, it's almost like taking batting practice. Your first 20 calls should be with companies that could be a customer maybe, but if you blow the call, you're not going to, kick yourself. If you get on the phone in your first 10 call, when you get on the phone with that enterprise account that is the perfect customer, you want to be dialed in how you pitch the company. And the only way you're going to get there is by practicing the pitch 100 times and also seeing what resonates, what doesn't, etc.
Yeah, makes sense, man. And you famously talk about 30 minutes that you spend on LinkedIn. I mean, is that still the number? Has that always been the number?
So I started really leaning into LinkedIn as a platform for powering our go-to-market, or expediting and accelerating our go-to-market, about 2 years ago now. I would say I do still at 9 a.m. every day have a 30-minute blocker to use LinkedIn. I would say some days I'm using it more than that. I'd say the 30-minute blocker is basically making sure that I'm engaging with content or posting content every day. There are certain weeks where I get into kind of sales mode and I'm doing a lot of direct outreach on LinkedIn, in which case I'm spending a lot more than 30 minutes on there. But I found that if you in 30 minutes a day, you can do a lot of damage in terms of interacting, engaging with content, posting content.
So the way this 30-minute block is structured is specifically you comment on your ICP or your target audience posts and you engage with them, and you also try and post, on LinkedIn in that 30-minute period, right?
More or less. I mean, to take a step back, I think what's really important to call out is that early stage startups, you're trying to get press, no one's heard of you, and it's really hard to get press. The market's more saturated than ever. There's less journalists than there were 10 years ago. And unless you're really doing something unique or have raised $100 million, it's just difficult to get journalists to write about your company. With that said, LinkedIn is the only publication in the world that every one of your customers reads every week. There is no trade publication that every one of your customer reads, but within reason, if you're in B2B or even B2C, most of your customers are probably on LinkedIn at least once a week, if not every day. And for that reason, I think the big unlock for me was realizing that's a place that I can post for free and get in front of all of our potential customers. And so for that reason, about 2 years ago, I committed to, I'm gonna post on LinkedIn once a day. And I hadn't posted on social media for about 10 years going into that, any social media, but said, you know what, this isn't for my socials. This is for Stacker and getting our brand out there and building a customer base. And in about 30 minutes a day, over 2 years, we've been able to build a lot of goodwill with customers. I'd say this past year, roughly 30% of the business we've brought on has either originated through LinkedIn or kind of can be directly attributed to some form of activity on LinkedIn.
Wow. You not posted for 10 years before you started on LinkedIn. I mean, wait, were you homeschooled? Were you living on top of a mountain? What
No, I think
were you doing, man?
I don't know. I just, as I hit my 30s, I got less active on social media.
Okay. I get it. But yeah, it's so rare, right? Not everybody kind of does that. But
Well,
I think
is it though? So, there's a stat that only 1% of LinkedIn users actually contribute content or post onto the platform.
Oh, yes.
So
I
think a lot of people, sure, they're posting on TikTok or Instagram, but for some reason it feels really cringe to post on LinkedIn. To me, posting a picture of myself on vacation feels much more cringe than posting a thought I have about the industry I operate in. So I think, again, at a certain point, I decided I'm going to stop sharing pictures of my burritos on the internet. Took me about 10 years then to realize, but I do have interesting thoughts that might be worth sharing with people in the industry.
Yeah, and the way you just put it, and you mentioned about LinkedIn that it's the only publication. I mean, I've never heard anyone compare it or talk about LinkedIn that way. And it's such a unique perspective. And I completely agree with that. Now, I see that the power of Stacker for a lot of large enterprises, and you gave a fantastic example of Square talking about, how many people, what kind of tips do they give and stuff. Is Stacker, and this is on the sideline, but is Stacker also another publication where startup founders somehow, because I couldn't find a plan or a pitch to the startup guy, but is that something that somebody could use it for?
We do work with a lot of startups to help them distribute their content. We work with a lot of organizations much smaller than Square, if that's what you're asking. Yes, we work with a lot of, Series A, Series B organizations, as well as bootstrapped organizations.
Wow. Okay. That clarifies it. Because I mean, when I look at the website, it's kind of positioned to enterprise, large customer kind of a use set.
I think, where this makes the most sense is for organizations that are making really interesting content from their data. So we just, in the past 2 months, started working with an organization named Pave. Pave collects compensation data. They are not a massive organization, but they have really unique data and are producing amazing content from that. And they're going to do really well. I'm sure hundreds, if not thousands of news outlets are going to be picking up their content this month. Similarly, we work with a really niche software company in the shipping logistics space that produces really interesting content about how shipping routes are, being used and not used as tariffs are impacting those things. And that's a small company, but they're going to get a lot of earned media with the content they're producing. So it's less about how big of an enterprise brand you are, as much as are you producing interesting coverage from whatever kind of expertise or data you have.
Okay. Well, that's a really unique perspective, and I'm going to use that. So this is a great idea. So somebody who's thinking uniquely about presenting the data sets or expertise could always reach you guys and try and see if Stacker would like to pick up what they're writing, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. let's jump back into the playbook. Now, you mentioned a 70-20-10 content mix on LinkedIn, and you're saying like give about 70% pure value, 20% wins, and 10% self-promotion. Could you give me an example of how, like, especially if you could talk about an acquisition that fell into that funnel, how does that work?
Definitely. So to take a step back, I think if you as a founder or an operator or really anybody is thinking about using LinkedIn to drive your go-to-market strategy or accelerate your go-to-market strategy, I think what's important to consider is you're essentially building a media company where you are the media company. But it's also important to remember that you need to you're building a media company, not just purely advertising for your company. And so what that means is you need to get people to follow you or become your audience, after which you then have the right to advertise to them, right? Media companies can't advertise to an audience until they have gotten that audience. And so the biggest mistake I see people make when they start posting on LinkedIn about their business is that's exactly it. They get on and they start posting about their business. And we all have seen that person on LinkedIn where all they do is talk about, look how great my product is. Look at this milestone we reach. Pretty soon you roll your eyes and you unfollow that person. And so my 70 strategy is essentially saying that 70% of the content that you post on LinkedIn should not be about your business. It should actually add value and be an educational or informative or engaging for whoever your customer is. So think about who are the people that if they were to follow me and eventually inbound and say, hey, Kinner, I'd really like to work with your company. That person, what do they want to read about when they log on to LinkedIn? What are the problems they're having at work? What are they excited about? What are they responsible for learning more about and becoming an expert on in their job today? And how do you create content on those things so that they follow you, they become your audience because you're sharing content that is relevant and helpful for them? So 70% of your post should be exactly that, just educational and authority building. Once people follow you because you are posting that content, that's where you have the right to start advertising to them. Advertising to them meaning sharing a milestone, sharing a product launch, sharing a list of new customers you brought on. That's when these people who have been following you because you share such interesting and engaging and informative stuff, all of a sudden are saying, wait, they just hit this milestone. What does their company actually do? And they're going and researching you. And then that 10% is what I call blatant advertising. That's the, hey, this is what our company does. I'm looking for customers that fit this profile. If that's you, you should reach out. And you can imagine that if I just went and posted that on LinkedIn, people would delete that. They would mark it as spam, right? But if you've been following me for 6 months and seeing all this interesting stuff I've been posting, that when I say, hey, I'm looking for customers, could be you're much more attuned to maybe saying, oh, that's interesting. I kind of like what this guy has to say. It'd be interesting to get on the phone.
Yeah, makes so much sense. Is there a specific, so I'm deep diving into what you just said, right? I want to dial down. To read those signals, I've come across a few tools. Like if you cross about 15-20,000 followers and you get like a few hundred people to like your content, do you use tools like Trigify or something that's doing social listening, qualifying on a clay table? I mean, is there any tech stack there that you use to do this?
So
to identify
in terms of,
who do you reach out?
So yeah, we have created a stack where essentially with a couple tools, when someone engages with my content, we are pulling that list, we're running them through Clay, we are kind of filling out a bunch of information on each of those individuals to see which of them are qualified as potential
So you
leads.
enriching
that
use
data,
qualified.
and then
Yeah.
we don't use anything to automate outreach. I feel very uncomfortable automating DMs. I think that LinkedIn inboxes are saturated with fake bots and DMs, and then that's not a good strategy. But essentially then myself or someone on my team is taking that list and thinking about who should we reach out to because they're now essentially a warm lead.
Oh, do you mind me asking what tool are you using to scrap that data?
So we're using HeyReach and we are using Clay.
Yeah. No, fantastic. We use HeyReach. I had Vuk from HeyReach on the podcast with me.
Okay.
So we were kind of love HeyReach. It's brilliant. No, that makes sense. And I see in your playbook that you basically have kept a really lean team and you bootstraps. You kind of don't blow money where it's not needed to. And I think that's something that people who raise tons of funding kind of end up doing. So yeah, that's brilliant. Now, you also talk about, that you never sold a deal before you kind of hit this large ARR. And you mentioned about this conversational method of, how do you spend time on LinkedIn. Did you build any playbooks or like systems, AI based agents that help you write this content for outreach, or you kind of free flow, just spend time? Because a lot of people are not that confident. A lot of people in Europe, Asia, they want to use AI as much as they can.
I don't use AI to write anything. I think that I think that writing rather is probably going to be one of the great lost arts over the next couple years, and that the people that are really good at it
Whoa.
will have a huge competitive advantage over everyone else that is saying, "Hey, ChatGPT, will you write this email for me?" But it takes time. I write a lot. I spend a lot of time drafting emails and email copy and copywriting. It's not something you can perfect overnight, but I do think it's something that if you just say, you know what, I'm not going to get good at this because ChatGPT lets me, I think you can get by. But I think that folks that do decide to really invest in that skill set will have a huge advantage over you.
Yeah, that's profound, man. I mean, everybody else that I have spoken to, some way or the other, they do insert writing done by AI and GPT, and even customizing GPTs on their writing style. So it sounds like them, it behaves like them, stuff like that. But this is unique, and I do hear you. I do feel like that a lot of times, that AI just kind of lowers the quality of your writing, and you can see that happening.
Yeah, I mean, think about you're a college kid, right? And there's one kid who every time they need to write an email or respond to an email, they say, "Hey, ChatGPT, I just got this email. What should I say?" Right? And then there's another kid who decides to write everything themselves. At first, the kid using ChatGPT is probably going to have better responses, but they're not going to be learning. And the kid who is actually writing everything themselves is going to have a learning curve, but over time, they're going to figure out how to break through the noise, because when everyone is using ChatGPT to write their emails, like already you see it with LinkedIn content where you can just tell, well, this post is written by ChatGPT or by AI, or this comment is written by AI, and people write that off. And so I do think over time, the people who have really developed a skill of how to have a unique voice, how to stand out from the crowd will have a pretty big advantage.
Yeah, and it's already happening. I mean, we've tested multiple posts. When you write it yourself, I think the algorithms are picking it up. So no, that makes total sense. Thanks for kind of highlighting that. Now, you basically, when I look at what you've done in Stacker, it operates in a unique space between brands and publishers. How did you identify this white space? I mean, you had to build trust on both the sides. How did you kind of stumble upon this or discover this space?
Yeah, I guess I discovered the space because in a past life, I spent about 6 years doing business development, selling into publishers, and so noticed that news outlets across the country did have an appetite for more content they could bring into to their sites to kind of fill coverage gaps. That said, as you pointed out, we've essentially built a marketplace. We have the supply side of content looking for
Yeah.
distribution and the demand side of publishers looking for more content. And I think with any marketplace, you got to think about kind of with the chicken and egg, how do you fake one side, or how do you kind of beef out one side to be able to get the second side? And so for us, that was, look, we're not going to be able to get these publisher relationships until there's actual content. So we actually started with a newsroom. We built out a 10-person newsroom, and we started producing really great coverage. And we took that coverage to news outlets and said, would you consider, would you be interested in taking this newswire and publishing it on your site? They said yes. And then over time, we started working with third parties to actually curate content and feed the newswire.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, the background kind of fits well into what you're doing right now, but the interesting bit and the pivot, or I mean, let's say the evolution of the product within AI search. I mean, that's super interesting for me because, I think that didn't exist. The conversation didn't exist till about like 6 months or a year ago.
Yeah.
So what's your take on that? I mean, I have multiple questions around that, but I just want to understand you positioning Stacker as one of the tools that could get you into the LLM answers, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
people call it AEO, GEO, LLM optimization.
Pick your
There's so many
acronym.
words
Yeah.
for it. Yeah, yeah. So what do you like? How do you see the space evolving? What's your one-liner comment about it?
My one-liner comment is that in SEO, backlinks were kind of the oil that helped
Yeah,
that
yeah,
helped and help sites rank, and that in GEO or AEO, that brand mentions seem to be the new backlinks, and that the best way to get hundreds and hundreds of brand mentions is by having publishers republish content that you wrote with your brand name in it. As you mentioned, this was not even a concept a year ago. We did not start Stacker to help brands show up in
Yeah.
LLMs more often. But it turned, about 4 or 5 months ago, as a lot of different parties started publishing research on correlations between companies mentioned in LLMs and companies not, that consistently kind of the top indicators were how often your brand is mentioned on third-party sites, how many branded anchors you have, and then just the types of text that were being written. And by happenstance, our product does exactly that. And so I will say the past 6 months, we had a great summer for new business because I think a lot of people recognize that our product does pretty much exactly what you need to do to increase your rankings in ChatGPT.
Yeah, it definitely does. And I mean, I was talking to Rita from SEMrush day before yesterday. Actually, we were shooting an episode, and she mentioned exactly the same thing about brand mentions. SEMrush now has a tool for it as well, like which just analyzes. I mean,
Yep.
you're uniquely positioned that you can help get that done.
Yeah, I think that's
So
definitely
how
what we're seeing is a lot of those companies will help you analyze. There are not a lot of companies that help you take an action, and we're really
yeah.
well positioned for that over the next year.
Absolutely. So when I kind of think about it, I feel it could be like a really long haul for somebody who hasn't raised a large round, because I mean these brand mentions aren't cheap or aren't easy, right? I mean, you in the beginning you mentioned, unless you've raised $100 million round, nobody's going to kind of know, not big brands or big publishers going to feature you. So for a startup, let's say somebody hitting a Series A, or maybe a Series A to Series B, what, of course, apart from Stacker, how long would that journey be to be in the top of the LLM mentions, and how soon somebody should start it?
Yeah. So I think what's really interesting and compelling for early stage startups about GEO or AEO compared to SEO is time to impact. That SEO took years. If you were
Yeah.
a brand new company, you needed to build up domain authority to show up at the top of Google. That took years. And so as an early stage startup, it probably didn't make sense to invest in SEO early on because you just didn't have the time or resources to invest in things that were going to take 2 years to start panning out. Unlike SEO, with GEO, you can get a single mention on a third party website and have that be the reason that you're showing up as an answer in ChatGPT. And so we are literally seeing companies get a single earned mention and then show up as the answer a day later. So you're seeing ROI much quicker. So you asked, how do you actually make that happen without using Stacker? And I think the low hanging fruit or cheat code that we are seeing a lot of brands using is, again, producing unique and original content and then getting publishers to reference that content. So it's not, whereas getting backlinks was, hey, I just need someone to cover my company so that they will link back to us. Now it's, how do I create unique content that other people will talk about? So again, we talked about the Square example of Square has data on how much people are tipping
Yeah.
and they can publish content on that. But just other examples. So again, maybe everyone's familiar with Apollo. Apollo has content, or they have data rather, on when people are and are not responding to emails. So they can put out content on the best time to email a CEO, like when people are most likely to open your email. If you have compensation data, you can publish content on, the how compensation has changed over time. Every company does have some sort of unique angle, and I think publishing unique content from that and getting publishers to reference that is a low hanging fruit in terms of how to get brand mentions and ultimately how to show up in some ChatGPT answers.
You just mentioned something tremendous. I never thought of that being possible. A day later, like a brand mention, and a
Yeah.
day later, an LLM's recommending you. I
Yeah,
mean,
we're seeing it
you've
happen all the
seen that.
time. Yeah.
Wow.
We're seeing it all the time. And the reality is ChatGPT is changing the sources that they cite all the time. And so, the upside is, yeah, you can get something picked up and it'll be referenced the day later. The other piece is a week later, it may not be referenced. And so we do see this as something you
Yeah.
need to be doing consistently.
Yeah, yeah. But I think you just spoke about a brilliant hack that, I mean, write content that's kind of powerful and unique and solve it for publishers. So I think what you're also hinting at is that you'll have to build an outreach strategy to get this done early on, right? I mean, how do you keep reaching out to publishers unless you're on a platform like Stacker?
Yeah, you got to hire a PR person or a comms person. I think that's why a lot of companies do work with Stacker, is because if you're a big company, we work in conjunction with their PR and comms team to let their comms team kind of do a lot of the heavier lifting, hand holding with big names like, oh, I want to get written up on Wall Street Journal, whereas they can use Stacker for some of the long tail. And some smaller companies say it's not worth paying 100 plus grand a year for head of PR comms, and they're using Stacker as a way to supplement that.
Yeah. Oh, this is great. Let's I have a few micro questions about LinkedIn. I'm kind of going back to LinkedIn before I come to my pricing question. Now, LinkedIn seems to be getting tougher to get more likes and views. I mean, I've had friends I don't know if you noticed it. I mean, in the last possibly about 45, 60 days, I mean, people who were getting like 1,000, 2,000 likes went down by almost 30. Did you notice that, by the way? Or, I mean,
I think LinkedIn success comes and goes in waves. Yes, I have seen that over the past 45 days. It is not the first time it's happened. And I guess to me, it's, again, this is something that takes 2 years, or has taken me 2 years to really, took me about a year to start really seeing the fruits. So it is less successful today than it was 3 months ago. I am very confident it'll be more successful sometime in the next 3 months. Again, I think, they're just like any algorithm, they're constantly tweaking it. I think in tandem with that, my posts, when I post them, are getting maybe, I don't know, I haven't done the math, but let's say 30% less engagement. The flip side of that is, as everyone has noticed, they're promoting content from 3 or 4 weeks ago. And you're seeing older content on your feed. And so probably what those friends of yours that are complaining about 30% down are not talking about is that their posts from a month ago actually are doing way more engagement than they initially thought, because they're riding and getting promoted 3 or 4 weeks later. So what I'm seeing is that, yes, like on the first day or two that I post a piece of content, it's doing only half as well as it might have used to, but that I'm still generating leads from content that I produced 2 months ago, which wasn't happening 6 months ago. So I think, we're seeing a lot of people complain about, hey, I'm getting less engagement today, but they're not looking back and saying, oh, wait, but when I went back a month later, there's actually some really exciting data there.
Yeah, no, makes total sense. So what would you go after as a new founder who's just got possibly about 2,000 followers? Would you recommend a post a day and keep posting and find their unique voice, or because they might be getting like really less number of views, or is there a hack that they could adopt at that stage? Because slow burn, it's going to take them a year.
There is no hack, but consistency. We could do a whole other podcast on the types of content that, can do well and can build engagement on LinkedIn. But the reality is, yeah, you got to be there. It doesn't need to be daily, but once a week is definitely not enough. I think the reality is, I'm now at the point where we're driving about a sales call a day from posts on LinkedIn. That's the mixture of inbound and, occasionally me commenting and getting in touch with someone. But the reality is, the only reason we're doing that is because of consistency.
Well, that kind of makes a lot of sense. And considering you write yourself and you're spending all that time and you have that discipline, I think that's what people could take away from this, and if they want to kind of learn from your playbook. Let me just ask a question about SEO. Did you pay any special attention to SEO at Stacker? I mean, do you have like a vertical or a person who's dedicated on that? I mean, I know you get tons of brand mentions and stuff.
We did not. Small bootstrap team, and we had to think about, where are we going to lean in our go-to-market, and we leaned in on outbound sales. Could we have done better if we focused on SEO earlier on? Probably. But, when you're bootstrapped, you got to pick your battles, and we decided to lean in on what we knew we could directly impact, which was outbound sales.
So your outbound was typically the usual stack of Apollo, Clay. I mean, you mix it now with HeyReach.
So no, that actually just, that just really started in the past 4 or 5 months. That flow for the first 2 or 3 years of the business, it was classic outbound sales. It was send emails, it was network on LinkedIn, and find mutual connections. It was get scrappy and figure out how to get people on the phone.
Wow, man, that's inspiring. Let's jump onto the pricing question now. You mentioned something about discovering pricing after a lot of conversations. And I mean, I know you have a unique product. I mean, am I right in saying that you have a unique product? It's sort of a blue ocean?
Yeah, there's no one else that does quite what we do exactly.
Yeah, so it's rare. It's super rare. I mean, most of the companies that you talk about, like we spoke about Apollo, we spoke about HeyReach, every single one of these companies have possibly got 5, 6, 7 competitors. And if they don't today, they crop up like
Yep.
every 15 days, right? So when you are in a space like that, how do you drive pricing conversations with your strategy? Because it's the market or the next competitor that drives the price down or up, or, I mean, mostly down, right? What's your take on that?
So I'll say a few things. The first of which is we've made a lot of mistakes, which we've iterated on. And I'd say the first mistake we made is we charged too much because we could. So to your point, when you are the only one in market with something exactly like you do and people see a lot of value in it, you can really charge whatever you want. And for the first year or two, we did that. We let our sales team kind of just, hey, see how much you can get. And over time, the ACVs went up and up and up and up. The problem with that is if you're signing annual contracts, kind of whether people are actually getting that much value from your product, you don't see until a year later. And what happened was we were charging a lot of money, but people then were really putting a lot of scrutiny on renewals. And so over time, we decided, oh, you know what? We should probably reduce our pricing because what was more important to us was getting longer renewing kind of in retention
Yeah.
than it was to get the initial ACV. That's the first thing I would think about is, are you maximizing ACV or are you maximizing retention? Because those things are in contrast to each other to a certain degree. There's definitely some businesses where it's not going to be a repeat buy and you just need to charge as much as you possibly can. That was not the case for our business, which I think is an important question to ask yourself as a founder or operator. The second piece is, how do you do pricing discovery? And I think that comes down to a lot of those initial calls. Again, think, at first you don't know what you should charge and you have an idea. You're getting on the phone and you're saying a price and you're seeing how people react. If they say, whoa, that's really high, then the next time you get on a call, you can try it again and see if that first person was crazy or if actually everyone you talk to says, whoa, that's really high. If you're saying a price and people are saying, okay, yeah, we'd love to buy that, maybe you should try increasing it by 25%. But I think if you're only having one call a week, it's really hard to get that data and you're kind of triangulating from not enough data points. Whereas if you're having 5 or 10 calls all the time, it's much easier to make sure that you're not just making decisions based off of one call.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. You've kept your team really lean. By the way, I'm eager to know because LinkedIn doesn't give the right picture always. What's the
We've
team
got
size
just
right
north
now?
of just north of 40 people full time.
Okay, well, that's kind of a decent size. I mean, how do you decide on what role really to hire for, and what's your formula to keep it lean? I mean, are you all gung ho about agents replacing humans?
I'd say over the long term, let's look over a 10-year span. I'm gung ho about agents replacing some humans. I don't know, I don't think I don't know what it looks like in 10 years, but yes, I am gung ho on agents replacing humans over a long enough time span. Over the next 6 months, less bullish. I definitely think there are places where we can and are leveraging AI to make our team way more effective. But I'm much more thinking about, how do I triple revenue and not need to add any more full-time employees? I'm more interested in that than how do I cut the team in half because I'm replacing people with AI agents. I think, at least for the time being, we have really great talent that has institutional knowledge about how things work. Can't replace them with an agent. What you can do is say, what's the busy work you're doing? And how do I make it so that our account managers can handle 3 times as many accounts without needing to add new account managers or other similar roles? So
yeah.
I'm really interested in that piece much more than I am the, how do I replace team members?
Yeah. And
I guess
how
the
do
other,
you,
yeah, sorry, go for it.
how do you decide, what role you need to add a human to now?
So we do a budgeting process with our leadership team where basically once every 6 months, we say, look, this is how much we kind of can budget towards new hires and growth. And each group brings proposals of, product team says, I think we need a person to do this. And the sales team says, I want a sales ops person, and, et cetera, et cetera. We definitely have started just over the past 6 months asking ourselves the question of, can this role be done by AI or, do we need a person? But at the end of the day, it's that leadership team kind of debating which of these hires is going to have the biggest impact.
Yeah. And where all is AI implemented right now in the organization? How wide have you gone?
I'd say this wide. We're implementing it in a few different ways. There's definitely different processes internally that we've started to build out. How do we expedite this workflow? That ranges from, our VP of accounts, Melanie, has built an incredible tool that pulls in all the transcripts from calls with our clients every month and just provides a report of themes that came up in client calls at the end of every month that she provides to our executive team, a la, here's what our clients are asking about. There are a number of examples of that where people have said, this is something that I'm doing or that I wish I could do, and I'm going to leverage AI to make it happen without, needing to spend 10 hours on it. The other piece that we're really leaning into is we have a lot of data about types of content that are being distributed and what's being picked up and what's not. And we're starting to leverage AI to drive insights back to clients so they can optimize their content strategies.
Wow. So those are main. I mean, how about things like, SDRs? You mentioned you don't like to automate responses. Have you tried like a customer service agent bot? Is that still totally human? There are some popular
That's still totally
themes.
human for us. I'm not against it. I think for us, our smallest customers are paying us north of $2,500 a month, and they don't have that many questions. So we can afford to hire great talent and have them answer
Yeah,
those
that's
questions.
a
We're not
really
a,
high ACV.
we're not a e-commerce company handling questions from 10,000 people. So it's a bit different.
Yeah, that's a high ACV, man. That's fairly high.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, makes sense. So, just my last question is around a fact that if you were suggesting one startup founder who's trying to go from, let's say, $100,000 to their first $1 million, they've sold a few pieces of their, let's say, software company, I think, for the ease of it, or an AI tool. You've given a lot of ideas about how they should approach their. If you would like to add anything to it or summarize, what should they do right now? What are the 3 things they should focus on?
First one is, it is your job to network like crazy. Since day one of founding Stacker, I have made it my job to find a reason to get coffee or breakfast or lunch or go into someone's office with as many people as possible, just to let them know what we're doing and learn about the industry. I think that the reality is you never know what a conversation is going to turn into. An intro is going to turn into a 2 years later, hey, I've moved to this company. And it's your job, especially in the early days, to just get yourself out there, get your company out there, because over time, as you keep pulling on those threads, that's going to turn into partnerships. It's going to turn into you having cachet in the space. And so I think the first thing is just remembering that your job as a founder is to get out there and talk to people. The second is, just because I know people won't do it, but I think they should, is there is so much meat left on the bone if you are not leveraging LinkedIn, especially if you are in B2B. Again, it is the publication that all of your customers are reading, and you needed to start yesterday to get value from it 6 months from now. And it can feel really cringe at first, but it is one of the highest impact things that I've done over the past many years for growing Stacker. And also for growing my own personal career. That's the reason that you and I are talking right now. So, I started posting on LinkedIn because I thought it was going to drive sales, but it's also gotten me a lot of podcast interviews that I otherwise wouldn't have gotten, which has gotten Stacker's name out there, et cetera. So that's probably number 2. And then I'd say number 3 is just remembering that as CEO, it is your job to continuously be what I call expanding your map. So, as CEO, you've got a map in front of you of what the industry looks like and how your product fits into it, but that map ends somewhere. It's your job to go out and have conversations and figure out what exists out here beyond that map and, quote unquote, expand your map, because it's your job as CEO to be thinking about where does the company need to be a year from now? And the only way to do that is to kind of expand your vision for what's going on in the space.
Wow. You know what special effect comes to my mind now? There should be like a fire blast. So much of value, right? These 3 are fire, man. So awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Noah. I think this has been fantastic. I think you gave like true value, total value. So really appreciate.